Hi guys, welcome to this A-level PE revision video, and we'll be focusing on feedback, which is part of the skill acquisition side of the Pearson's Edexcel A-level PE paper 2 revision. So what we're going to be focusing on is what is feedback and the different types of feedback. We'll be focusing on the links to different stages of learning, and then we'll be also touching on different technologies and how they can be used to help with feedback. Starting off with what feedback is, it's information that you gain about your performance. So it's any sort of information centered around the performance, and it's generally used to help correct our errors and improve our technique. And ultimately, the goal of feedback is to improve performance. So your understanding of this should be able to give a sports scenario, sports example, such as misplaced pass. Players can adjust so the next time they make the pass, it's more accurate. With the feedback is also really important, and this key term here, strengthening the SR bond. It reinforces the correct action, and therefore the stimulus response bond is improved, which is basically learning. So coaches can praise performance of good things, like a well-timed tackle, a great shot, a great pass, things like that. And that increases motivation. So feedback is a great tool to improve motivation. Now, when we look at feedback, we've got three different sort of categories that we need to understand. So we've got like the source of feedback, we have the timing of the feedback, and we have the content of the feedback. And that's the way we can break down the different types of feedback. So there's two types for each of them, and we're going to go through each of them separately now. So the sources, we're talking about intrinsic or extrinsic. Timing, we're looking at whether it's concurrent or terminal, and content is either knowledge of performance or knowledge of results. So let's start with extrinsic feedback, because there's a lot of information in extrinsic feedback, and it's quite a common form of feedback. So extrinsic is information that comes from an external source, so outside of the body, and you just need to know examples of different ways that this feedback can come. So it could be from coaches, managers, it could be from the crowd or spectators, it could be from your teammates, or using video analysis and reviewing your performance in that manner. So having a decent example is always useful. So coach shouting instructions or tactics from the sidelines is an example of extrinsic feedback. And the benefits: it can prevent injuries, it can reinforce safety rules throughout the game, like keeping your hockey stick down in terms of training wise. Now, the important point is to say who it's best suited for, which is beginners, people in the cognitive phase of learning, because they lack confidence, and the coach can help motivate and encourage the individuals. And as they're inexperienced, they need lots of instructions to help improve their performance. They don't really know how to do this skill for their own back. They haven't got the knowledge, so they rely on the coach to provide the information and their knowledge to develop their skills and techniques. Now, we've got to be very careful, because too much extrinsic feedback can confuse players. Even though we said it's good for beginners, but too much of it can confuse players, and therefore performance decreases. Intrinsic feedback is intrinsic. It comes from internal. It comes from the individual themselves, from within the performer. So, and there are these sort of key terms of kinesthesis or kinesthetic appreciation, kinesthetic movement, the feel of the movement. That is the main source of kinesthesis, but there are other areas that you can utilize your senses to see how well you did. But generally, we're talking about the feeling of the movement. And if you are feeling the movement, you don't have to look at the ball, for example, if you're dribbling. You can just use your kinesthetic feeling to and correct your balance, etc., while you're doing the movement. So yeah, it's about self-assessing, self-correcting, and adapting your technique quickly by detecting these movements. Is really suitable for more experienced performers, so people in the autonomous phase of learning, because the beginners don't really know the skill and they haven't learned it sufficiently enough to know how to judge what they're doing and compare it to previous performances, because they don't know what good movement feels like, so they can't self-correct. They And elite performers have more of those essential skills and techniques to be able to compare it to and know when they're doing the correct action. So they have the schemas, they have the most programs in place that they can compare it to. And you can link in things like DCR and things like that to see whether it's working. Okay, so onto timing of feedback. Concurrent feedback is when the feedback is gained during the performance at the time the skill is being performed. So it's a training aid more than anything else. But examples, you need to think about examples: a coach shouting instructions as someone's running past them on the pitch. It's used to motivate and adjust technique. And the performer needs sometimes time to process the feedback, so it isn't as suitable for fast-paced skills or where people can't change the movement during performance. So typically in gymnastics vault, a coach isn't going to shout something to a gymnast as they're doing their vault because they can't correct their movement mid-movement, is too fast. And same with like a golf swing or something that's really quick. So this type of feedback is really suited for more longer, slower movements where you can adjust technique. So maybe cycling, running, swimming, where you can adjust technique as you're going. Terminal feedback is at the end of the movement. So terminal, if you think about the end of a flight or end of a travel, you get to your terminal in the airport. It's the end of the performance. So this is where you maybe need a bit more time to process the feedback. So you wait till the performance is over, you give the feedback, and then performers can think about it and process it. You might be focused about what went well and what they need to do to improve. So this is better for the golf and the gymnastics vaulting scenario that I talked about earlier. The things they can't change throughout the movement, they're too fast. So they'll do the movement, you'll give feedback, and they do the movement again, you give feedback. That's the terminal side of it. It could be post match, so at half time or at the end of a game, where a coach might reflect on the game and give strategies, tactics, and change the systems in place. This allows performers to go through in depth and focus on the tactics and instructions. Okay, then we've got the content, which is basically knowledge of performance and knowledge of results, which is KP and KR, often abbreviated to. So knowledge of performance is very straightforward. It's how did the skill turn out? How was the skill where you were performing it? So it's about the technique, the movement. How did it feel? Did it look good? Did you do the right things? Knowledge of results is just basically what was the end product, what was the outcome. So did you win? Did you lose? Did you score? What was the score? What was your time? What was your distance? This is basically the data. Okay. Now, using this information, we can then accelerate performance by focusing on what they need to do to improve, and also you can judge it against each other and compare. This is where you get your PRs and PVs, and that can be very motivational. Now, one thing to add in, you could have the NAC and NAF side of achievement motivation, and really NAC performers need to achieve performance. They love this sort of knowledge of performance. They really value this type of feedback. They value all sorts of feedback and really want to know how to improve and what their performance was, etc. Now, NAF type of personalities will avoid types of feedback at all costs. They don't like it, need to avoid failure. They just don't value that type of feedback. Okay, so if we go back to some of the stages of learning, the cognitive stage of learning. Now, generally, we've got 3 stages of learning. We've got cognitive, we've got associative, and we've got autonomous. Most often, the exam questions are really only focused on the cognitive and the autonomous. There's a little bit on associative. We'll touch on that as well. So cognitive stage of learning is basically your beginner. And at that point, the feedback should be very clear, very simple, and positive. Lots of feedback as well. This is best suited as extrinsic feedback, and probably the content is what knowledge of performance, how did it go? And athletes rely on this type of feedback because they're unsure of how to do the movements. So they rely on what they're getting from the coaches, and they use that and they process information. That's how they learn. And remember we talked about that SR bond strengthens the SR bond. It gives understanding to the performer, and if a performer is doing and often this phase of learning, it's trial and error based learning. In the cognitive phase of learning, someone has a go, gets it wrong, has a go, gets it right, and the learning is reinforced by feedback, which is that SR bond. Now, often the beginners and the cognitive stage of learning don't really know what they did wrong, so they need that coach to tell them what they did wrong. Okay, so if we're looking at timing, terminal is great because it prevents cognitive overload. Cognitive overload is where people get too much information and get confused, but it can be concurrent as they're going but it can too much and too often the concurrent can reduce the learning processes, so you've got to be careful on that one. And maybe a 15 marker might sort of say, well, what's good and what's bad, and they can both be used, but when and how. Okay, reducing the and as you go in concurrent feedback, you rein it back in, so the performer doesn't become dependent on that type of feedback. Visual feedback is often more effective, or visual guidance, I suppose, at that point is more effective because performers can see how they're getting on to see the results. Their knowledge of results is useful because they don't really have a generalized motor program to compare it to. So they just want to know, did they do well? Did they not do well? What was the score? What was the distance? What was the length? What was the time? So all these things are important aspects of feedback, but you can see all of these types of feedback, except for intrinsic, is useful for a cognitive learner, and really positive, very praise-based, and that will strengthen the SR bond. And you could bring in one of Thorndike's laws of effect in there to help strengthen the SR bond. So learning takes place when a reinforcer follows the movement or the activity or the whatever you're talking about they're learning. So using positive reinforcement will definitely help someone in the cognitive phase of learning. So, like I said earlier, associative doesn't really have much information. They don't typically ask questions on it, but it's just worth knowing. That's sort of like the intermediate phase between cognitive and autonomous. But feedback is more specific, but less frequent. It can be both intrinsic. You start bringing intrinsic and extrinsic into it, and it helps refine the movement and reduce the amount of errors being made. Now, the next big area is autonomous, and if you just think the opposite to what we talked about with cognitive, that always helps. So if you remember one of them, just go opposite with the other. But basically, autonomous, we're really sort of trying to rein back the external feedback and really focus on the intrinsic or the kinesthetic feeling of the movement. Movements at this point are more consistent and should be automatic, and therefore the performer just needs to really reflect on their own schemas, their own motor programs, and compare what they've done and see whether they've got it better. Knowledge of performance is really important because it helps understand a bigger picture of what they're doing, and they'll be able to assess what they've done by the feel of the movement. Okay, and therefore the SR bond, the stimulus response bond, becomes adaptable at that point, and they can move and adjust their movements patterns and learn new scenarios for their movements. Feedback can be negative at this point, and many elite performers like and value negative feedback. They want to know what they've done wrong. They don't need to know all positives. They like some criticisms, and usually that's terminal. You can have concurrent as well because they can multitask, they can focus their attention and selectively attend on the right different things as well. Feedback can be very technical on this page because they understand the movements, they know what they're doing, they know what you're talking about. They can really get into the nuances of the movement and find movements within the skill, and they can also be looking at more tactics and strategy when they're looking at their feedback. So finally, we're going to close this off with just a bit on technology, because that comes up a lot in the A-level questions, and how technology can be linked to feedback. Sometimes you can cross this over one of these questions that cover using examples from across the course study. So you incorporate social aspects and physiology and training sciences, etc., into this type of question and answer. So the first sort of technology you've got is video analysis, and you think about, right, you've got in your pockets smartphones and cameras. And it helps you understand the technique and improve the performance. And now the benefit of these is that it's really instantaneous. You can do the movement, record it, and watch it back straight away, and then dissect that skill. Watch it back in slow-mo. break down the skill into its individual parts, and then you can do for different practice methods like whole, part, whole, etc., to try to improve performance. Now you have these technology can help you with internal monitoring, so things like your heart rate, your lactate levels, etc. So once you've got your heart rates, you can work out the correct training zones, and this objective data can be really accurate and really helpful for planning training programs, and the link over to the anatomy and physiology aspects. And then linking into that aspects more, you can use mechanical and improve technique and biomechanics, etc. So you've got mechanical analysis, and you've got force plates, acceleration monitoring, GPS, movement tracking. All these sort of things can help improve your biomechanical techniques, and that provides a really detailed breakdown of the skill acquisition and skill movement. Then you've got different specialist environments. So you've got things like wind tunnels, harnesses, and they will develop things like kinesthetic awareness, what the feel of the movement might be in those scenarios. The wind tunnels simulate like faster environments, and the harnesses can develop more safe practice, which you can then gain feedback while you're doing the movements. All of this enhances your analysis of your performance. It will improve. If you have a perfect model, you can then compare what you're doing to the perfect model using technology, and ultimately it improves your learning, it improves your confidence, and it improves your motivation. So it's quite generic themes, but it will help. Now, the main downside to any sort of technology and feedback is that we can become over-reliant on that technology. And therefore, when it's taken away, we lose our confidence, we lose our motivation, we can be scared or anxious because of it. The other aspect is that all of this information, all of those sort of things, if they're going on non-stop, you're just bombarded with information and it's too much to process, and therefore cognitive overload can kick in and learning can be impaired and performance can drop. So loads of information on feedback. Definitely revise this area, because it could quite easily be a 15-mark exam question just by looking at the strategy where we've broken it down, bringing in loads of different areas as well. Technology and feedback could be a standalone question on its own. So definitely an area to revise. Right, best of luck in your A-level exams.